Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure on behalf of the Warren Heritage Society to welcome you here for a chance to tour one of the oldest and most historic homes in Front Royal. And right now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Richard Hoover, who is a member of the Board of Directors at the Heritage Society. Richard, who is a Clevelander, graduated from Washington and Lee University. He served in Germany as an armored rifle platoon leader and entered the Foreign Service in 1969, serving in Bonn, Prague, Gaborone, Nicosia, Rabat, Vienna, and Nairobi. And I don't know if Mr. Hoover was trying to trick me, but I had to look up 3 of those names on Google pronunciation. But at the Department of State, he was officer in charge of Berlin and received the Department's Superior Honor Medal for his work as U.S. Permanent Representative to the Nairobi-based United Nations organizations. Settling in Warren County, he has served as chairman of the Warren Heritage Society, president of Kiwanis, and commander of the Colonel John S. Mosby Camp, SCV. He lectures on history and the fine arts, manages an antique arms business, and is completing his 11th year as chairman of the Lord Fairfax Soil and Water Conservation District. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hoover.
Long ago, I was president of the Heritage Society and was very worried, along with my fellow board members, that the sheer weight of our archival records, mostly family histories, was about to crash right through the floor of our ancient archive building. Now, during this same time, I found myself before a Heritage Society in another Virginia county. I won't tell you where. I went in, I introduced myself, asked to see the archives, and I was shown a single metal filing cabinet with but 2 of its 5 or 6 drawers containing all that they had. I was horrified. Later, upon reflection, it came to me that the far greater volume, the near bursting character of our own archival collection reflected something very special. That the people here, whether living or dead, loved Warren County and wanted to remain attached to it forever. And our Heritage Society lives up to their expectations, whether in its exhibitions featuring the history of Warren County veterans, Black History Month exhibits on history and culture, or with exhibits dealing with the American Revolution, period fashions, or other broad aspects of American history. And because of the society, there are numerous historical monographs, whether dealing with the days of integration and massive resistance, or with the history of the poorhouse and the eponymous road which it overlooks. And there are evening presentations made to a packed Ivy Lodge meeting room. I've given several of these myself. One of them was on the American-British painter from Pennsylvania, Benjamin West. A promotional flyer went out everywhere, reading, quote, "A tale of expiring generals, wild Indians, ravishing odalisques, apocalyptic mayhem, cultural decay and revival, and the introduction of colonial America to the outside world of the fine arts. Caution," it wrote, "because of the robust nature of this presentation, babes in arms must be accompanied by at least one parent." What fun. And of course, our society is proud of its Bellboy Cottage, Balthus House, and of the other dependencies which, in addition to Ivy Lodge and the Virginia Hale Archives, tell the world something about what we did and who we were and of who we are. It's a great pleasure for me to congratulate the Society's full and part-time staff and volunteers, those who press ever onward to ensure the continuation of our passionate mission on behalf of the living and the dead of Warren County. I would ask them to stand. Melanie, you're just in time for this. Where are you?
She's back there.
I want all staff, that's Melanie, to standing. Tony, yes. All right, and would you please, Jan, would you please yell out loudly your names and tell the audience what your title is, if you have one. Melanie, starting with you.
You just said it. I'm the manager.
Thomas Lockhart, board member.
Jan Long, archivist.
Lorraine LaHue Holtquist, board member and past president, twice.
I'm coming to the board in a minute. Tony?
Step here, Tony Carter, archivist.
Okay, and that's it for volunteers and staff. And members of the Heritage Society Board, please stand and give us your name and the position you may hold, starting with you, Haley.
Behind the columns. I'm Hallie Groves, and I'm currently the president of the Warren Heritage Society. Thank you for being here.
Lorraine,
Yes.
again.
Again? Lorraine LaHue Holtquist from Front Royal, all right.
Okay. Who else do we have from the board?
Laura McPeak, board member.
Oh, yes, of course.
That's okay.
I didn't hear.
Laura McPeak, I'm a board member.
Okay, that's great. Society is also very grateful for the area organizations which give of their cooperation and support. For example, are there any members present from the Garden Club of Warren County? All right, thank you, Lorraine. And what about from the Sons of the American Revolution? Okay. Finally, we do have a blazing Warren Heritage Society social life. I mean, it's short of scandalous. Those who don't know it and are curious, for heaven's sake, see our society manager, Melanie Gregory, right there in the rear, right after this tour, and fill out your membership application. If you are inspired to serve the society as a volunteer, please see Melanie as well, and do it as soon as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. It's now my pleasure to introduce the current owner of Bel Air, Jeff LaHue. I've known Jeff since we graduated from Warren County High School almost 45 years ago. And I don't know if Jeff remembers this, but I think we were in homeroom, and you said, you know, 45 years, I'd like to host an event like this, and you asked if I'd be the MC. You remember that? Jeff is a direct descendant of Peter LaHue, who bought 200 acres in 1754, and the village was known as LaHue Town. In 1788, it was renamed Front Royal. And Jeff, if you want, we can start a petition to change the name back to LaHue Town.
I'm all in.
Okay, that's it. We got about 50 people as a start.
I'll pay for it.
Okay. Jeff's family moved to Bel Air in 1973, and Jeff, like his father, is a successful businessman and an important member of our community. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jeff LaHue.
Tony emailed me a few days ago and asked me to send him a bio. I probably should have. I could have stopped some of that foolishness. Tony's right. I am Jeff LaHue, and on behalf of the LaHue family, I'd like to welcome you to Bel Air. Bel Air is very special to me. I grew up here, along with my little sister. Mom and Dad bought Bel Air in 1973. We took 2 years to renovate it. It had not been lived in for quite a long time. And I don't want to steal anybody's thunder behind me, but I will say a little bit about what we did. We built this porch. We built that part of the house right there. In fact, that's my bedroom right up there. And we built the 2 rooms above it. There are 2 reasons, actually, those 2 rooms were built. Maral, I hope I'm not taking anything of what you're going to talk about, but shush me if you need to. Dad, I don't know if some of you obviously knew Dad, and he's kind of a famous fella. He had a band, and he sang music all over the place, even in Las Vegas. And so they did a lot of entertaining. We had a lot of dignitaries and special guests here, so there were parties here a lot. And so those 2 rooms were built, and I hope you'll take the time to walk up and see them. They were built for parties, but more importantly, they had to be built because upstairs in the attic is the signature room of Bel Air, which some of you have already been up there, I think, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. The people who visited Bel Air from almost the time it was built. In fact, I've found an 1808 signature when I was a kid up there. People that visited signed the wall. And up until 1973, when the LaHues bought Bel Air, to go visit that room to see those signatures or to even sign the wall, you had to negotiate a support beam that was about 4 feet high, and most people couldn't. Well, at least the people that visited during our time, because again, they were entertaining and they were drinking heavily, would have never made it under that beam. So that top room you see up there gives you, and you'll see when you walk up there, an easy access to the signature room, and I highly recommend everybody going up to see it. It's pretty special. I think someone's going to talk about Lucy Buck a little bit here today. Lucy Buck's signature's up there along with her brothers and sisters. If you can't find it, I'll show you. And again, Tony mentioned that I'm a descendant of the LaHue family. Peter LaHue founded Front Royal in he came here long before that, but I think they called it LaHue Town in 1754. He was my 9th generation direct descendant grandfather, and the LaHues are pretty proud of that. I know that today's not about the LaHues, although we certainly do like to make it about us. It's about this special house. But if you have any questions about the LaHue family or about Bel Air, I'll certainly be glad to answer them if I can. About Lucy Buck, my family felt the time that we were here. By the way, my father was here for 50 years. I just lost him a year or so ago, but he lived here a long, long time. We felt Lucy was here with us the whole time. She gave us lots of different signs that she was here. We think we know where her bedroom was. In fact, I showed it to Maral earlier today. But she was a good ghost and a friendly ghost, and we enjoyed having her. Anybody needs a tour, we got the whole house open except for the bedrooms, and someday we'll do that too. But again, I'm as owner of Bel Air, I'm very proud of that. By the way, I'm not sure just what Bel Air's future holds, but I promise you it will be a good and safe future. But on behalf of myself and my family, welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next speaker is Maral S. Kalbian, who will share with us some of her knowledge of the changes that have occurred throughout the years here at Bel Air. Ms. Kalbian is a historic preservation specialist who has practiced in the Shenandoah Valley and Piedmont areas of Virginia for 35 years. She researches, evaluates, documents historic architecture. This work includes the organization and completion of architectural history and cultural inventories, preparation of survey reports, writing of individual and historic district nominations for the National Register of Historic Places, writing of walking driving tours, formulation of local historic district ordinances, implementation of historic districts, design recommendations for historic districts, 106 compliance projects, historic structure reports, which, by the way, we have one, I think, that you did in 1991 for Warren County. Is that?
Yeah, did a survey. I did a survey.
So we have that down there at the archives. During her career, she has completed more than 50 historic district and 40 individual National Register nominations, as well as 35 successful rehabilitation tax credit applications. She's done work in Clark, Frederick, City of Charlottesville, Warren County, to name some. I would tell you all there is to know about her, but we would probably be here till next Saturday. So if you will, please welcome Maral.
Probably don't want to know half the story. Anyway, hello, thank you all for being here, and thank you for asking me to speak. Jeff had contacted me a couple of months ago about completing a National Register nomination on Bel Air, and I had never been to Bel Air before, and part of what I enjoy about my work is going someplace and knowing nothing about it, and then trying to uncover the story. And part of what I really enjoy is being able to share that with other people so that they can get as excited about it as I do. And I do get excited over this stuff a lot, so I will try to curb my enthusiasm. Okay, I won't. There are people shaking their heads. Anyway, so I've started the process of listing Bel Air on the National Register. The first step is to make sure that the Department of Historic Resources agrees with me that it's eligible, and they came out here and I wrote a quick little report and they said absolutely yes. And so I want to talk a little bit about what makes Bel Air so unique, and I'll just quickly do the history, and I won't get into the genealogy, and I really won't get into a lot of Lucy Buck because other people are going to speak about her. But the sort of genesis of this property was in the 1780s when Thomas Buck purchased part of the land from a Mr. Wiley. And then, ironically enough, in the early 1790s, he purchased land from William LeHue. So the Bucks built this house, and around 1795 to 1800. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it looked like then, because it's a little different from what it looks like now. And the Bucks owned it all the way till 1905. And then the Downings purchased it. And as very often happens when someone buys a house, they want to change what it looks like. There are changing needs. The way buildings are used changed due to technology. When this house was built, there was no electricity, there was no indoor plumbing. And so the Downings made a lot of changes to the house. And then the LeHues purchased it in the 1972, as Jeff said. So there have been only 3 owners in its very long history, which in and of itself is pretty remarkable. And I think, each family left their imprint on it, and that's still very evident in the house. So I'm going to get my little props here. Visuals are always good. Okay, this is the front of the house where we will be shortly for refreshments. So when the house was constructed, it had this unusual plan of these one-story log wings flanking a central brick federal-style house. Now, I think that these log wings might have been here as early as the 1780s, but we don't know because they're no longer here. And we have, no real evidence except they were here during Lucy Buck's time, and she talks about them. So we actually know what some of the uses were, which is very interesting. So this central portion was one of the earliest brick houses that was built. This was still Warren County when the house was built, but it was still one of the earliest brick houses in the area. And it was a federal-style house. And this drawing that was done around the 1860s shows what it would have looked like during the Civil War. And it had a one-story porch on it, which is typical of the time. And here is a photograph of it taken in the 1880s, again, before the Downings. Do we have any Downing descendants here? Do you know any Downing descendants? Can you find some Downing? Please, I'm trying to find out who the architect was for the changes that occurred at this house. And I've, been searching, and like sometimes they mention it in old newspaper records. And like I found when Mr. Downing purchased the property, it was the same year he got married, and there was a reference at his wedding that said that he had recently purchased Bel Air and has fixed it up to move into, but there's no mention of the architect. So whoever can find me blueprints and the architect's name is going to win the prize. You can have these. Anyway, so in 1905, so let me back up a little. So during the Civil War, it was, the home of the Bucks. Lucy Buck was here. She was one of 13 children. She was 19 years old, and she kept this very detailed diary that really talks about what was happening in the area, the troops occupying the house, the troops occupying and destroying the fields in front that we'll see when we're on the front porch. The slaves who left after the Emancipation Proclamation, some of them who came back, where some of them lived. There's mention of a mill and some of the enslaved persons living in the mill. And we're going to try to find where that mill is, which is another interesting thing. The grandmother lived in the West Wing, which would have been this log section here. And it's really interesting to try to, I know a lot of historians have looked at that, at the diary from the perspective of what was going on historically from a military perspective and what it meant to the people to have the occupation, literally in their front and backyard and in the house at some points. But it's also interesting to look at the architectural components of what does she mention. And, Jeff said they think they know where her bedroom was, and you can sort of figure out what, was going on and where they lived, even though changes were made. So in 1905, the Downings obviously wanted to have a very fashionable house, which is, usually what you do when you're restoring a house or renovating a house. You want to bring it up to modern standards. It's no different than what we do when we maybe buy an existing house. We redo the kitchen, we redo the bathrooms, So what they did is the house originally would have had a center passage and that's called an I house, very typical floor plan for Virginia houses. And that would be your public place where you would meet, the people that came to visit. And then you'd have usually a parlor where you'd take your closer friends, and then a dining room. And that's what they had here. It was typical center passage, one room deep with a room on either side. In 1905, the Downings decided to change that floor plan. And I'm going to be in the house, and I'll be happy to explain things as we, as you go through and point things out. But they completely changed it using classical revival elements. There's that unfinished oak trim that you see there. They added what's now the dining room, which has that bay window. That's a very Victorian feature to have, projecting bays at an angle. And they redid the staircase, and there is, we can't go upstairs, but when you're on the second floor landing, if you crane your neck, don't crane it too much though. You can see where the original turned balusters and handrail are that go up to the attic. So, they didn't touch that because they figured nobody's going to look up there. And so we have remnants of that. And then in this room here, we have the original mantle. And I want you to look carefully at it because it's really finely crafted. A lot of it has been filled in with just, layers and layers of paint. But you can see how beautifully handmade it's done. And that was what the house would have been finished like. And William Buck, who wrote in 1936 his memories of the house, describes a lot of the trim that would have been in the original house. The portico that's on the front is a classical revival thing. Again, the Downings put it on. It was, as we know from those pictures, it was a one-story porch. I actually think one of the porch supports is in the basement. Do you know that? Yeah. I think it's this octagonal post that it looks like they inserted in the basement. And the original kitchen was in the basement, and we know that enslaved persons also lived in the basement. So it's a very interesting house. Jeff mentioned, all the graffiti or signatures that are upstairs, and I think those are well worth seeing, but please don't add your name to the list. There'll be a fine if, no, I'm kidding. And, but anyway, this house is a wonderful example of an evolved house that still tells the story of, the Bucks who built the center section that still remains, the Downings that made the changes, and then, as Jeff mentioned, the LeHues who made some additions to the house. So, like I said, I'll be in the house. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have as we go along, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maral. Our next speaker is Hallie Groves. Hallie is a lifelong resident of Warren County, and she is currently the president of the Warren Heritage Society. Hallie teaches with the Warren County Public School System, and she plays a very important role in the future as far as educating our next generations. She is a descendant of Lucy Buck, and she will read several passages of Lucy Buck's diary and letters. Hallie?
Okay, so I'm most comfortable doing this in front of my 13-year-olds. This is a little terrifying for me, so please just bear with me. I do read out loud all the time, but again, reading to adults is quite different than reading to children. So I am a lifelong resident. I'm a 9th generation from here in Front Royal, Warren County, Shenandoah Valley. And my relatives extend all the way into Frederick and Clark primarily, and then again here in Warren. I'm also a 9th generation descendant of Peter LeHue. I descend from his daughter Winifred, and I am follow me here, a 5 times cousin, 4th times removed of Lucy Buck. So her mother, Elizabeth, was an Ashby, and we share a grandfather. So I tell my children all the time I'm very tied to this area, and I love this area, and I respect all of you that work so hard to procure everything that we have here. So what I would like to start with is, sadly, a book that is no longer in print. For those of us that were able to purchase this a while ago, it's a wonderful treasure. It is called Sad Earth, Sweet Heaven, and it is the diary of Lucy Buck. I wish I could tell you that we have this down at the archives for sale, but it's now sold out, and we don't have any way of getting a reprinting of it at the moment. But I do want to read a perfect introduction of Lucy Buck by Laura Virginia Hale. Like, who could have even done it better than her? Lucy Buck was born at Front Royal, Virginia, September 25th, 1842. Y'all, that's tomorrow. That's 180 years ago Lucy Buck was born right here. She was the daughter of William Mason Buck and Elizabeth Ashby Buck. She was reared at Bel Air in the finest religious and cultural heritage of the Old South. As the oldest daughter amongst 13 children, she assumed loving responsibility for many family and household duties that sorely taxed her young prowess and patience after all the servants ran off with the Yankees. To a revered and trusted Christ, she committed her burdens of anxiety for the adored absent brothers, for her aging father, bowed under the weight of economic ruin, for the future of the impoverished land, Charming, vivacious, and popular, she had many beaux, but she never married. Continuing her diary, she was a long-remembered and beloved figure as she sat with a pad on her knee in the midst of a chattering group of young relatives or in the quiet of her room, exerting herself to a right despite pain and fatigue until her death in 1918. So that is just a little bit about Lucy. What I'm going to read to you is some of Lucy's words and some of her mother's words. So in this book, which is called Sad Earth, Sweet Heaven, these are all Lucy's words. And I'm going to go ahead and bring attention to this painting back here by Mort Kunstler. This is actually Lucy and her sister Nellie as they were greeting Robert E. Lee on his way back from the Battle of Gettysburg. And I believe that was July 24th of 1863. So Lucy is writing in her diary about what she saw, and I just think it's wonderful the way that she pays homage. It also will give you a little bit of a feeling of what they felt about Robert E. Lee. Was awakened by hearing Nellie called up to supply the soldiers with milk this morning, but what chagrin was ours when we were dressing. I have to back up. Was awakened by hearing Nellie called up to supply the soldiers with milk this morning, but what chagrin was ours when we were dressing. Father came in and told us the diary had been broken into and robbed. It was robbed of everything except the jars and the little Britannia cream pitcher. Here was a predicament. A large family with guests in the house and not a drop of cream for coffee or an ounce of butter for breakfast. Laura thought some could be procured of Aunt Betty and started off upon a foraging expedition while we proceeded to clean up and get breakfast. Just before the meal was ready, she returned with dress, dragged in with Drew at Dew, and laughing heartily. She said that she had passed through a whole brigade, infantry, artillery, baggage wagons, cattle, and going into town and coming back had discovered a soldier in the middle of the field below the house paying his respects to our large cream jar, which lay there half empty, and she demanded it as her property. He yielded very meekly, saying that he had just found it there, not knowing where it came from. And she had hid it well. She could send for it. Uncle Gilbert, too, soon came in bringing a missing crock and a plate. Now, she goes on to, talk about this cream and this butter and how they now have something for breakfast to give all the guests that are in their family. And then I'm going to skip down. This is now around 4 o'clock. A little after 4 o'clock, the boys went over to town to see General Lee, who was expected in, and Father down to the river to see the pontoon bridges. Presently, one of the little children ran in to say Father was returning with General Longstreet. It proved, however, to be General Lee and his staff. They dismounted, some of them, walked out under the shade of the aspens. Some went to look at little Frank asleep in his wagon under the trees, and the general with his chief, and 1 or 2 others to his seat on the porch. Father stepped to the door and called Nellie and me and introduced us to him. The old gentleman greeted us heartily with such a warm, fatherly manner, and then turning, introduced us to his staff one by one. He then said to me, "Won't you sit down, my daughter, and let us talk some?" I laid my hand on a chair, standing near in compliance, but he made room for me on the seat by him, and he said, "No, not there, but here, close by me." When I was seated, I told him how much pleasure it gave me to see our defender, the father of our state, and he replied, "Oh no, my daughter, I only wish he were more worthy of being seen. There, look at those young rebels," pointing to his staff. "They're a great deal better worth looking. Gallant young beaux that they are." They asked for a rebel song, and Nellie and I played and sang for the first time since near Walter's death. The excitement and the embarrassment called a great difference in our singing, and I knew General Lee wished to know if we were not afraid to let those treasonable songs resound beneath our roof, such as a war chant of defiance. They remained but a short time, and just as they were leaving, the old gentleman hoped that he might not be troubled much more by our enemies, and bade Nellie and me by all means not to let any of those fine young Yankee officers carry you off. We replied that we depended upon him to prevent such a possibility. Before leaving, he enriched Nellie's autograph book and mine with his name, at the same time protesting that he knew he would much prefer having our sweethearts there rather than his. Dear old General, how I've always admired him and loved him, but what a filial reverence mingles with that feeling now, and how much more the father than the general he seems. How his hair is silvered and his brow marked with thought and care. Yet what a noble, benevolent spirit looks forth from his brown eyes. What an air of dignity about his every movement. I just wanted to point that out because she speaks of him with so much love. And I just think it's important that we remember that. I think also with Lucy Buck seeing him, she knows what he's just gone through. Probably the worst battle he's ever seen in his military career, and taking the weight of all the losses at Gettysburg. So I just wanted to point that out to you, but this right here is Mort Kunstler's interpretation of that first meeting. And I do also want to say that this particular print we will have up for a silent auction inside if you are interested. Now, dear Irving, dear Lucy, this book is a collection of letters. This is not a diary, but this is just as much fascinating as reading someone's diary. What I'm going to read from here is I'm going to actually go to Elizabeth, which was Lucy's mother, her words on General Lee and his visit here first, and then I'm going to skip over to September, so please just bear with me. She starts it out, this is Bel Air, Monday, July 27th, 1863. My own dear Irvie. And then I'm going to, a lot of this doesn't pertain to anything that we would really be interested in at the moment, so I'm going to skip over to where she actually talks about General Lee. The first night they came here, they broke open our dairy. They took out every drop of milk, cream, butter, and even the crocks, the cream jar, the cream jug, and after that we fed them as long as we could find anything to give. We were very much provoked at first, but often seeing their sufferings, I could not blame them. Many of them had been for days with nothing to eat. Strange to say, they said they did not find provisions as plentiful in Pennsylvania as expected, and that was one reason we did not stay there longer. But you would be amused to hear the boys tell how the women were scared, and how they brought all their nice things and begged for them not to burn their barns. They said they had nothing to do but to call for a matchbox, and they could get anything they wanted. We had many of our Army acquaintances to call among them, Mr. Herbert and his friend. I believe Lucy wrote you about him. Mr. Macaulay of Huntsville was wounded and left at Gettysburg, but the best of it, we had our dear old Chief General Lee. He, with his staff, called and stayed about an hour. The family were charmed with him. He drew Lucy up by his side like she had been his own daughter, and the girls, and them to play with him. He is a specimen of a real gentleman as well as a patriot, and we do feel proud of him, and I think justly. I trust he may be spared to see the end of this struggle and reap the reward of his labors. I apologize. So that's just a little bit of what Elizabeth thought of General Lee. So again, I just wanted to bring attention to that for you. Now I want to go ahead and go forward a little into September, and I won't be much longer, I promise. The passage I'm going to read to you is actually titled Home, September 1864. And in this, Lucy is actually writing to her brother Irving, and she has not heard from him in a really, really long time. So this particular letter is really, really long, but I'm going to save you from the length of the letter because it is a really, really long letter. And I'm going to skip over to where she is filling him in on the details of what has happened here at Bel Air, and I find it really amusing. I was in Clark nearly months and wrote you but once while I was there, but I didn't know your address. Now, when she says in Clark, they also had an aunt who was a sister to William Buck, and her last name was LaRue, and they owned a farm that is called Bloomfield Farm, and it is still there today, and it's quite beautiful. But she went and stayed with them quite often, so she's first saying that she was writing from there. I was in Clark nearly months, and I wrote you but once while there because I didn't know your address. The last fortnight of my stay was a most exciting one. First, we had Sheridans and Averils like wolves let upon us, and at such a time that we had. Fanny LaRue was staying at Aunt Cattie's, and she was frightened us almost in her encounters with those double-eyed divans. Once they were carrying off Cousin Will's pet horse, and she ran out and tried to wrench the reins from his hands, and he tried to ride over, and she seized a rock and she flung it at him. He drew his pistol, but he did not shoot. Again, while searching Aunt Cattie's drawers, Fanny tried to conceal a casket of jewelry, which had belonged to Aunt Millie, and it was left carelessly in the drawer. The little viper who was conducting the search saw her and ordered her to surrender it, and she refused. She tried to get up the stairs with it, but she was stopped by him in the hall. He threatened to shoot her, and she dared him. And he laid a muzzle to her head, and he fired. 'Twas a blank cartridge with which it was loaded. But she didn't know that, and she stood without flinching. The Yankees caught the hand containing the casket, and with the unoccupied fist, she dealt him a blow, true Sayre style, that sent him reeling 10 feet from her. We all rushed forward at this, dreadfully alarmed for her, but another of the detectives came forward and interfered. Once they were very near killing Uncle LaRue, and I was fully convinced the house would be burnt over our heads. They killed the sheep. They stole all the available horses. They broke into the pantry and with impious hands seized the jams and the preserves that I had taken so much pains to make just the day before. I tried to hold on to one jar, but the wretch pulled it out of my hands and he pushed me rudely away. All day the yard was filled with the cries of the murdered fowls and the oaths of their assassins. It was raining and cold, and we had to stand picket on the different porches from 9 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. Now, in those days, when it means to stand picket, what they did is they literally, and we're talking about the women because all the men were off, the women would literally line the porches like the pickets in a fence, and they would stand upright and tall and still and dared anyone to cross them. So as they're watching the Yankees in their yard tearing up everything, they're guarding the house, these women. Like, what courage that took. Sometimes they would try to frighten us away by loading their guns and pretending to fire. Then they would swear horribly. I couldn't help but be amused at Fanny. They found out that she was actually from New York, and they delighted in provoking her to quarrel with them. One of them was telling her of his chase after an old hen, and she retorted by remarking that if he would only display as much perseverance in the pursuit of the rebels, he might actually succeed in catching them. The Yankee said that he had seen the rebels run a great deal faster than the hen. Well, said Fanny, if you did, 'twas when you looked over your shoulder. Now, I just wanted to read just a little bit of that because I think a lot of people say that Lucy Buck writes very sad words, And this right here, I think I see a lot of her humor in the writing, and I wanted to share that with you. Also, in seeing this, I can't, like, Laura Virginia Hale described her as a lady raised in the Old South, which means she was a true Southern belle. And for a woman to never marry, that's a very courageous move for a woman of her time, to not be secure in her future. And I have to wonder if the Civil War helped shape that in her character, because she learned to be so tough and courageous during the war. Is maybe she just didn't want to give that up. But there's one more thing I want to read to you, because I find it very, very comical. And those of us today living will not understand it. I didn't when I first read it. I literally had to go and research it. And then after I researched it, I realized just how funny she was. She often wrote to another gentleman, Colonel Benton Roy. And he wasn't very good at writing back to her. So she is scolding him, but in a way that they did then, not now. So I have to remind all of you, today we are not classically trained in school. And she was, because that was part of their education then. She starts it, Bel Air, September 12th, 1864, to Colonel Benton Roy. Really, my good Socrates, I had not imagined you possessed so much of the Xantippe element. Xantippe was the wife of Socrates, and Socrates was very, very dismissive of Xantippe. So in her saying that, she is Xantippe and he is Socrates, and she is scolding him. And I just find that I find it very funny. What a rebuke of a negligent correspondent you administered, and how unjust it was. Listen, I will convince you that it was unmerited. And she continues on, and I'm not going to continue to put you through this, but I wanted you to see all different sides of the Buck family, one with the mother, who is missing all of her male children, and excuse me, with Lucy herself. And I hope you enjoyed what I chose for you. Again, please keep in mind tomorrow is Lucy Buck's 180th birthday, and that she was born right here in this beautiful home. And we hope as a society that you enjoy your day today, you enjoy your visit inside. There are refreshments, and we do have drinks. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Hallie. And I think, as she mentioned, we do have the dear Irby, whatever his name is, and dear Lucy. Dear Irby, I can't see from it. Dear Irby and dear Lucy. We have those books for sale. We also have many other books down at the Heritage Society. We have maps. If you haven't been there before, I encourage you to come down. It's really a lot of neat things. I just started as the archivist in the middle of March, and we're always continually finding very interesting things. We got genealogies, we have photos and old buildings and what they used to be at one time. I'd like to offer special thanks to Lorraine Holquist, Suzanne Silik, Tom Lockhart, and Hallie Groves for their generosity in helping sponsoring this event. Also, we'd like to thank Mike McCool and the Rural Examiner and his staff for putting together and printing the program and helping to advertise this tour. Also, special thanks to Devin Smith. He's the owner of Delightful Foods Catering, and he's providing the delicious food we're about to enjoy while we tour this lovely historical property. And as we mentioned before, just to bring to your attention, and Hallie read when General Robert E. Lee came here, we have this painting over here for silent auction. We will move that inside near the front porch. We'll have bidding sheets set up on the table, so please, anything that comes from that goes to help fund our Heritage Society. And we appreciate everybody showing up here today, and we hope that we see you in the future for other events. If you have time, now the thing about this house, there's so many different vantage points you can see it from. You can see it from down there at the fire department. You can see it as you're going down, and I guess you see it from the side there, but when you go down Commerce Avenue, if you look over, you can see the front of it. And that's kind of where that painting was depicted. And actually, it was Jeff's dad, Larry, who contacted Mort Kunstler about creating a painting here. And I believe it was done in 2000 and...
Actually, Mort contacted Dad.
Okay,
Yeah, Mort's idea.
okay. Okay, that's not what I read on the internet, so, and I always felt like if it's on the internet, it's gotta be true.
I was there, Tony.
I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, it's on the internet, it's gotta be true. So anyway, that's fine, I stand corrected. That's fine, but anyway, it's still a great painting, and if you have a chance, when you leave today, if you wanna go down Happy Creek, take a right on Commerce, and then take that first right, go down to Water Street, extend it, there's actually a Civil War historical marker there, and you have a very good picture of what's depicted there. And when you're at the front of the house, if you look down over there, that's actually the creek. Okay, I was right on that one. So anyway, but as Maral said, she will be available for questions. We'll also have staff members, Jan Long, she's the lady in the hoop dress. We'll also have Melanie Gregory, and some of our board members will be available for questions. And again, on behalf of the Warren Heritage Society, we hope you enjoy the tour and that it becomes a memorable experience for you. Thank you very much and enjoy.